This is the Culture Study Podcast, and I'm Anne Helen Peterson.
I'm Sarah Goodyear. I'm a journalist.
And I'm Doug Gordon. I'm an advocate. And along with Sarah, I am the co-host of the War on Cars podcast and the co-author of the book, Life After Cars, Freeing Ourselves from the Tyranny of the Automobile.
So in the introduction to the book, you say, at this point, we are not driving cars. Cars are driving us, and we're headed for an existential crash. How did you arrive at this thesis for your book?
Well, I'd have to say it has been through long and painful observation of all of the ways that cars are hurting us and hurting our society and our environment. And I've been covering cars and transportation policy as a journalist since about 2006 and really looking at it carefully.
Yeah.
And what I've seen is just really dismaying in terms of the harms done and the damages done. And what seems existential to me about it is the way, as with so many other systemic problems in our society, that we aren't able to attend to it. We aren't able to see it.
Yep.
And we aren't able to cope with it, therefore. And the reason that we can't look at it a lot of the times is because it's so all-enveloping. And so I do think it's something that is a fundamental challenge to the future of our species, of our societies, and we need to look at it face on.
It strikes me as something that's been so ideologically normalized, much in the same way that in American society, like taking your husband's name. There are all these very, very good arguments, even to people who are ready to receive those arguments, who are on board with those arguments. And yet there are still the argument that I always get from feminists is oh, but it's so much easier at preschool pickup when we all have the same last name. And so the convenience rolls over all of these other things that are trying to underline that it's weird that we use these massive vehicles to get everywhere and that it has not always been this way. And that it's also not necessarily this march towards progress is more and more cars, right? I think sometimes that's part of the argument as well.
Well, I think getting back to your original question about the intro to our book, this idea of this inevitable march towards progress, that might have been true at the beginning of the 20th century or the middle of the 20th century. But now we're seeing, Americans are sitting in crushing traffic everywhere they live. It doesn't matter if it's Los Angeles, Chicago, or Milwaukee, or a small town. Just to do anything takes a very long time. The financial side of this, the fact that a new car costs $50,000 or more. Car insurance rates are higher than ever for a variety of reasons.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah. And so that's part of the existential crisis too. It's one thing if you're spending 10 to 15% of your take-home pay on transportation. Mm-hmm. It's another thing if you're spending 30%, not to mention the housing costs that are associated with a sprawled out built environment where you either have to spend a ton of your money to live in the middle of a nice city or spend a ton of your money on a car to live in an affordable house. So, yeah.
This audience, I think, is one that is very receptive to these arguments. And one thing I really appreciate about the book is at the very beginning, you're this is a book for people who are already firmly on board. This is a book for people who are skeptical. This is a book for people who listen to the arguments and agree with them, but then always come up with their version of but it's so much easier at preschool pickup. And I think what our progressive audience really appreciates is an invitation to not just think about this on a theoretical level, to not just be we know cars are bad, right? But to be okay, what would that world actually look like? We're looking for practical answers in terms of what's happening now, that sort of thing. Have you felt that as you have done events around the book tour and the reception to the podcast and the reception specifically to this book, have you felt that eagerness over the last, 10 years to actually let's figure this out?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
100%. I think both Sarah and I have been doing some version of this for a long time. Sarah as a journalist, myself more as an advocate. And when we began, there was a much more defensive posture that both we and the people we were talking to would take on when
Yeah.
we would talk about this. We might be a little reluctant even to say what we were doing. And then if we did bring it up, there was the immediate, like, you're never going to change anything.
Yeah.
Now, even the people who live in car dependent places, people who love their cars, let's say,
Yeah.
do recognize that this, like we said, is unsustainable, unpleasant at best.
Totally.
I always say that even drivers hate driving. The type of driving that most drivers do stinks. Like getting stuck in traffic or at the school drop-off line, for 20 minutes.
Driving in New York sucks. Just like straight up.
Like,
Yeah. So we have seen more people open to the argument and a larger group of people who are advocates themselves or who are advocates in spaces related to these issues. Like the bicycle safety advocacy world used to be very siloed from the housing advocacy space.
Right.
The climate space and environmental space was seen as sort of maybe related to the bicycle space, but not deeply integrated into it.
Yeah.
All of these things now, there's a much more holistic approach to how car-centric design increases housing costs, to how it's aggravating the climate crisis, to how it's making us more socially and politically isolated.
Yes.
So that has been a dramatic shift, even in just the time since 2018 when we started the podcast.
Yeah, and I think that what we've seen on the book tour, we've gone to 18 cities so far. We've got another 8 or 10 that we're going to be going to. And they've been really diverse cities. Like we've been to Seattle and Portland, where these issues are front of mind and there's a lot of action on them. And we've been to Phoenix and we've been to Houston. And what's been really exciting has been to see that in every one of these places, including the like deeply, deeply car dependent places, there are these really vibrant, activated advocacy communities and elected officials as well, who are actively engaged in making change. And it's not just marginal change. It's not just a bike lane here or there. It's attitude changing, and it's really bringing the challenge to the halls of power and saying, this system doesn't work for the people of this city, including, as I say, like a place like Houston, which is about as car-centric as it gets. We met a guy there who drives an F-350 truck and lives in the suburbs and is sort of exactly the kind of person that you would think wouldn't care about this at all. And he is actively involved in Bike Houston and went with us on a bike tour of downtown, and talked the whole way about how he wants his life and his children's lives to be different and less car dependent. And that stuff has just been so exciting for us to get out on the road and see it.
Yeah. No, I think of it as like almost this broadly intersectional fix for a lot of what ails us. And you break this down in the book, like all of the ways, like I want to get the table of contents. I have it right here. The table of contents is like, and you also do not shy from statistics, which I appreciate, like the actual number of like people who die.
We had to really, it had to be more than like a polemical argument. It really had to be like a well-researched, because we are aware that people can approach this, and be approached by this and say, no way, no how, you're never taking my car away from me. Like we had to be more than just like two radicals, right?
Yeah. And like the part 2 of the book is how cars ruin everything. But it's really convincing. It's such a compelling argument because it's like cars ruin childhood, cars ruin nature, cars are killing us, cars ruin society, cars are unjust, and all of these things. I buy all of these arguments and talk about them in different ways all the time in my work, like especially with community, the amount of ways, like the struggle that people have in order to maintain friendships or in order to like be integrated parts of each other's lives. Take the car out of that. And it actually solves a lot of problems, but it might not be apparent because I think sometimes people look at the immediate solution of like, well, if I have a car, I can go hang out with my friends, which is kind of predicated on like a 15-year-old's logic. Like when I was 15, I grew up in Idaho, so we got our licenses when we were 15. And like getting a car was a way to hang out with your friends, but it doesn't have to be that way now.
Yeah. I mean, I follow your work about friendship and the importance of friendship really closely. And one of the studies that we cite in the book is Donald Appleyard's work on the way that traffic affects our relationships with people who live on the same streets that we live on.
Yes.
And if you live on a light traffic street, you're 3 times more likely to have friends on that street than if you live on a heavy traffic street.
Yep.
So this idea that we have to travel to find our friends and that they're friends that we already met some other way is also really interesting. I mean, I just started a friendship with a woman who lives around the corner from me in Brooklyn, and we do live on a low traffic street. And the way that we met was we saw her walking her dog, and we started talking about the fact that our dog had recently died unexpectedly and how sad that made us. And she was like, well, you can babysit my dog when I go away. And then that's turned into a real friendship in 6 months because we had that contact.
Yeah.
And it's somebody that I actually have a lot in common with. And I'm really hopeful that we're actually going to really be real friends. And so I think there's so much to be gained socially, even if it's not deep friendships, but it's that kind of incidental contact
loose ties.
that keeps you kind of alive, you know, that keeps your soul alive. And cars just deaden that. And so that's like a super important part of it for me.
Yeah, we talk in the book about the former Surgeon General's report on the loneliness epidemic.
Yep.
And how if you search for the word car or traffic or sprawl or anything like that, you won't find it.
Yep.
And yet that is absolutely a major driving force, pun intended, I guess, of our loneliness epidemic is that, you know, people are, especially the baby boomer generation, are stuck in places where they don't have many acquaintances and they don't get the little dopamine hits that you get from like recognizing your dry cleaner or your pharmacist and not just seeing them as a person with whom you have a transaction in the store, but maybe a neighbor, someone who walks down the same sidewalk as you on their way to or from where they're going. And I think that's a really, like Sarah was saying, not just the deep friendships that you might strike up if you meet someone, you know, at the schoolyard or on the corner, but truly the like, oh, I recognize you because I just see you every day. You know, those are lovely things to have in your life. And you don't have them with cars. You have to be much more intentional about building relationships when you live in a car-dependent place.
I'm going to go more into this when we answer the questions, but I live on an island that you take car ferry to get on and off of it. 3 weeks out of the year, the car ferry goes out for what's called dry dock. And so sometimes people leave cars on the other side, which means they don't have a car on this side, which means a lot of people are essentially hitching rides. And like everyone on the island, like it's kind of annoying to stock up for 3 weeks, whatever, but it becomes a time where individuals are forced together in ways that they aren't usually, in really like lovely ways, whether that's on the boat, like everyone is sitting together, hanging out together, saying hi. It only lasts 8 minutes, but it's like a lovely little time, or figuring out how to get transport. Like it forces interaction and it forces intimacy. And I understand some people are like, I just don't want to fucking talk to anyone ever. And like you can, and I know this from riding the subway, you can indicate with your eyes that you don't want to talk to anyone ever, or you can walk. Like there are options. But that's just kind of a forced experiment and how it breeds this sort of intimacy. Okay, so we need to get to the listener questions because they're very good.
Yes, yeah, they really are.
We're going to start with one from Fiona, and this one's a little long, but I think it really lays out what goes through a lot of minds when they think about life without cars.
I have a small second-hand car with low kilometres because I always catch public transport to work and I cycle and walk when I can. I fully support increased public transport options, truly. However, I still consider it a privilege to have a car and to be able to drive. Having the option to drive gives me freedom and choices I wouldn't have if I had to rely on public transport. As a woman, it provides me with autonomy and in some situations safety. For example, can I enroll my child at the school that suits them best, that is a 10-minute drive but inaccessible by public transport? Can I take that job I really want on the other side of town and still get my kid to after-school soccer? Can I shop at the cheaper fruit and veg shop I'd need to drive to? I just feel like every time I hear people talk about a wonderful carless life, either it's a big city with amazing public transport, or a small town where you can afford to live walking distance to everything, or the person is privileged in where they live and what work they do. And I feel like it's usually the woman giving up the opportunity to get some things done quickly and easily by car, and instead spending ages on public transport and putting up with less choice and freedom. Do you genuinely think it's possible to be carless in a small, spread-out city like mine without restricting your job options, reducing your capacity to visit spread-out family and friends, and limiting choices in you and your family's education, leisure, shopping, etc.? Do you not end up stuck with what's closest or on the train line? That seems to be what happens to my friends that have no car.
So this has always been a huge selling point for cars, right? Freedom.
Yeah,
It's a great
freedom.
que- it's a
and
great
and
question.
It's a great question. And for women in particular,
Yeah.
historically, cars have provided autonomy. And certainly in the early days of cars, a lot of women really felt empowered by them.
Yep.
So I don't want to discount that. And I don't want to discount the very real lives of people who live in cities and towns that have been designed for the car, where things are spread out. Absolutely. You don't have as many options in a lot of these places. And you might want a car to access those options for sure. And first of all, I think that if you can live with fewer cars, if you can have one car in your family instead of two or three or four, that's really great. And I think that, is something that we completely, recognize as a great solution relative to everybody having a car. But this kind of gets to something that I say a lot, which is that in North America right now, and particularly in the United States of America, living in a walkable, transit-rich environment has become a luxury good.
Yep.
And that's unacceptable to me. I don't think that it should be only for privileged people to live as I do in a place where I have all of the opportunities I want, all of the different kinds of shopping I would ever want to do, every kind of school that I might want for my child is all accessible by walking or public transportation or bicycling. All of that is accessible to me. Why do I get that? Because I'm privileged enough to live in Brooklyn, New York, and people in 98% of the communities in our country don't get that. I think that's fundamentally unjust, and that's part of what we're fighting for. In the meantime, I think being real about the limitations of our systems is great, and there's no shame here. Like we're not into shaming people for having to use cars and for wanting to use cars for the things that they can access. But for someone like Fiona, I think it sounds like she's already doing a great job of, giving herself more choices and more freedom.
Yeah.
That's the choices and freedom that we want our government and our planners to give us when they're designing our communities and when they're fixing our communities, because we have a system now that is broken and that is sick, and we need to heal it. And when we're doing that work of healing and repair, I think we need to keep physical proximity and all of the stuff that it enables at front of mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say I think Fiona is almost like a poster child for our argument in many ways. Is that we are not saying no life with no cars. We are saying, in a weird way, life with fewer cars, as Sarah said, like life with maybe one car instead of multiple. And Fiona sounds like she's sort of doing the heuristics of, in this case, to access this thing, the car is the best tool for me to get home late at night if I'm a woman and I don't feel safe, or access the cheaper grocery store, or better educational opportunities for my child. The argument that we make is exactly that. A car is a tool. Now, if Fiona lived in a place, as I think even more Americans do, where there wasn't even the option for her to walk to a park or, walk to a closer but maybe more expensive grocery store, and she had to default to using a car for every last trip, that would be the opposite of our argument. That would be the opposite of freedom as we see it.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like she's sort of living a sort of life after cars in the way that's possible for her right now.
Yeah.
And that's great. That's fine.
The thing that it makes me think of, this part at the end where it's like, you reduce your options when you reduce essentially like your parameters of your travel capacity. And again, sorry to come back to living on an island, but because we live on a short ferry ride away from a mid-sized city, it's like a 25-minute drive into town. Because of that proximity by car, the fact that you can get to the city by car, there are fewer options on our island. This wasn't the case even 50 years ago when fewer people had cars, fewer people went off island, more people worked on the island. There were more options to eat dinner, to have like a little store, like just there were more services, and like there was an auto repair shop, that sort of thing, an auto repair shop, which is funny, on the island. The
Everyone
school
needs
was
a
more
walking
robust.
distance auto repair shop for sure. Yeah.
Actually, that's
You
they
would.
do.
You
They
would.
do.
Yes.
Kind of do.
When your car breaks down, what do you need? Yeah.
But the islands in the San Juans that are much further afield, that's more like an hour and a half long ferry ride, they have by necessity developed a more robust infrastructure in so many ways, not just like doctors, but also like maybe 2 grocery stores, that sort of thing, right? Like, so sometimes that delimited space means there are more options near you, instead like creates neighborhoods. And I know this is part of like the walkable city argument, right, is that you are creating mini neighborhoods within the larger city instead of everyone get in their car and drive to the big box row, which is an incredibly crammed and horrible experience in the car as you try to exit on these like stroads. Can you define a strode for us so that we can
Yeah.
So a strode is, I think it comes from Chuck Marohn of Strong Towns. And the idea is that it is a road that is neither a highway nor a local street, but tries to function as both.
Yes.
And we all have examples of that in our communities, including in New York, where it is where the big box stores are often located, the bigger auto zones and that kind of stuff, where maybe there are sidewalks, maybe there are not, maybe, but there are a lot of driveways, but then also high speed limits. And it sort of doesn't work and is usually not safe for anybody.
Incredibly
so that's
high
sort of the
mortality rates.
short definition.
Yeah.
Right. And also just really they take up a huge amount of space, and that space is wasteland.
Yeah.
It's just space to move through. And I sometimes, and this sort of goes to your point of, if we have smaller neighborhoods that we cultivate and that have smaller amenities that serve the people who are in that catchment area, the space itself becomes more textured and richer and, more of a sort of, if you think of it in an ecosystem sense, it's more diverse. It's more like biodiversity, right?
Yeah.
And so if we foster that, then our spaces become more rich and interesting, but also so does our time, and our time that is spent going to do the things that we have to do. And I often say that cars, they create all this waste space. We see that. We see the space alongside the highway that is really just, like when you're taking an exit ramp and there's a grassy area there, that area is nothing, right? We've just created nothing there. But also your time moving through that space is also a wasteland that is often nothingness. Okay, maybe you're listening to the radio, to a podcast, to music, that's great. Maybe you're having a conversation with a friend, that's great. But essentially, we've created a system where we're always moving through space and time to get to the stuff we want. Mm-hmm. And we're not thinking about just how nice and rich and more rewarding it would be to be moving through space and time that hasn't been blasted to smithereens by cars.
Right. Yeah. And I think also like the ability to travel long distances is, I understand it as a privilege, but I also think that it's like overhyped. Like there is, there are real benefits to say not leaving the island for 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a great quote from Andre Gorce, a French philosopher, who says that the car wastes more time than it saves and creates more distance than it overcomes. And he argues you can get yourself, of course, you can get yourself to work doing 60 miles an hour, but that's because you live 30 miles from your job and are willing to give yourself a half hour just to go the last 6 miles.
Yeah.
And I think about in the context of what Sarah was saying, like I don't consider a 45-minute subway ride much of a waste because I can read.
Yep.
If I choose to talk to another person, I can also, like you said, send those signals that I don't want to talk to anyone and pop the headphones on. A walk through a beautiful neighborhood to go get my groceries does not feel like a waste. I might bump into a friend.
Yep.
Or notice a new business that I want to go to the next time that I'm out. Or lament the loss of a favorite business, that has gone out of business. The kind of things you just can't see or notice or experience when you're driving because it's wasted time.
Yeah. And the thing that I'll say to anyone who's listening to this and like is coming up with objections in their head, like, oh, well, I would like to live near where I work, but like there's no affordable housing there. Like, absolutely. The thing that in conversations like this, it's not, oh, let's only fix the car thing. It's like, let's fix the car thing. And like we were gesturing to before, let's also fix the affordable housing piece of the problem as well. Like
100%.
For sure.
Absolutely. I mean, that's all part of it. And again, it is like, I think thinking of it as an ecosystem can be really helpful.
Yeah. Today's episode is brought to you by Blueland. So I'm getting over a cold. Maybe you can hear it a little bit in my voice. And you know what I do when I'm trying not to give everyone in my world that cold? I clean my surfaces. I love cleaning with Blueland because it doesn't smell like toxic chemicals because it isn't a toxic chemical. Blueland is on a mission to make it easy for everyone to make sustainable choices and choices that smell a lot less like toxic fumes. Blueland believes that hardworking, clean products can be the norm, not the exception. I especially love their cleaning sprays, their toilet bowl cleaner. I've talked about that before. Their hand soap. I really like that. They all come in the form of this like little tablet. It's like an Alka-Seltzer. The tablet for the sprays and for the soaps, you just plop it into these super durable containers that come with your order. These are containers that will last for years, and then you add water. The toilet bowl cleaner, it comes in the form of like a slightly larger tablet, but then you store them in these reusable tins, and when you need more, you order more of the tablet instead of amassing more and more and more plastic. The tablets also really work. I'm on well water here, and well water leaves all sorts of mineral deposits. Like we also have hard water. It's just really hard to clean. Blueland tablets take care of all of it. Blueland is a certified B Corp and Leaping Bunny cruelty-free certified. Their formulas are EPA Safer Choice certified, and many products have also earned Cradle to Cradle's Gold Material Health Certificate. And right now, Blueland has a special offer for listeners. You can get 15% off your first order by going to blueland.com/culture. You won't want to miss this. blueland.com/culture for 15% off. That's blueland.com/culture to get 15% off. Today's episode is brought to you by Blissy. Okay, so the other day I woke up with this tiny pimple, like straight out of 8th grade, right on the tip of my nose. And it was so hilarious and mortifying. I mean, there are many reasons why I could have a pimple. Any 44-year-old knows that, like, acne never leaves you. But I'm also, like, pretty sure that it's because my Blissy pillowcase was in the wash. Blissy pillowcases are amazing. They're cooling. I really love a cool pillowcase. Like I flip it over and I'm like, this is my dream. They're super gentle, and unlike cotton and satin, they don't make your hair frizzier or hold on to all the dirt and bacteria that give you zits on the tip of your nose. Blissy silk pillowcases also help reduce breakage when it comes to your hair. This is huge for me. I feel like I'm dealing with this all the time. I don't know, again, if this is just something about being 44. And also help reduce sleep creases, aka those embarrassing things on your face when you roll out of bed and onto a Zoom. They're made of 100% pure mulberry silk, which is super breathable, hydrating, and hypoallergenic. Plus, they're fully machine washable and available in over 100 colors. So no matter the schema of your bed, there's a Blissy pillowcase for that. They're also a great gift. This is for like the person who has everything and you want to get them something sumptuous. Because you're a listener, Blissy is offering 60 nights risk-free plus an additional 30% off when you shop at blissy.com/culturepod. That's BLISSY.com/culturepod and use code culturepod to get an additional 30% off. Your skin and hair will thank you. Okay, next question builds on this, and Melody's going to read it. It comes from Anne.
Are there examples of places where cars have been eliminated or lessened in an effective way? I can't imagine my community without cars. And also, I would love it. Does it all need to be torn down or can we readjust?
You can 100% readjust. In the book, we talk about the Belgian city of Ghent, which, like a lot of European cities in the 1960s and the post-war period, really experimented with car-centric design and cramming cars in every last nook and cranny of the city. It was the wave of the future. And they found that by the 90s, this was creating tons and tons of problems. And so they pedestrianized the immediate center of the city, the historic core. There was a lot of objection to this. The mayor at the time got a bullet in the mail. Ironically, they later found out from the owner of a shoe store who thought that this would hurt his business and other businesses. And then by the time you got to the early 2010s, they were experiencing the same sort of problems just further out. We spoke to a man named Philippe Boiteux, who's the mobility minister there, the kind of director of transportation. And they decided to see, like, how can we reduce the number of cars that are circulating through our city? Because a number of the cars, and this is true, I think, in lots of American cities, had no real business in the city. You know, they were just using the city as a shortcut, going from one side to the other.
Yeah.
So, and this is true, I think, there have been studies that show this in New York and other places.
Yep.
And so what they did was they spent many years devising a traffic circulation plan, where they would reverse some of the direction of the streets. They would ban cars from other places where they felt they wanted to raise the rates of cycling, for example, or make it easier for public transportation to get through in traffic-free streets. And Ghent is circled by a ring road. And what they did was they basically said, we're going to divide the city into 6 portions. And if you want to drive from, let's say, section 1 to section 3, you can't just drive straight across. You have to go out, drive around. I'm making a lot of hand motions, which I know will not probably help with your podcast listening audience. But like, you have to drive out, drive around, and come back in. And what that did was, number one, it cut the number of people just using the city as a cut through, people who didn't live there, work there, or who weren't shopping there, anything like that. Number two, if you lived in the city and you thought, oh, I need to go see my friend who lives in section 6, let's say, you might think to yourself, it's going to take 30 to 40 minutes to drive just across town because I have to go out and come back around. The bus, walking, or biking will be faster. So they did this with I think it only cost about 5.8 million euros, which is a very inexpensive amount of money. And they instituted it after years of planning, literally over one weekend in 2017. Wow. And it immediately resulted in a huge drop in the amount of cars coming through the city. They met their 2030 goals for cycling rates within 2 years. Nitrous oxide levels went way down. And the interesting thing, I think the most surprising and probably important thing, is that time and the experience for drivers was improved. So because what ended up happening is that if you absolutely needed to drive within Ghent, you were no longer stuck behind the person who was just cutting through. You were no longer stuck behind the person who just decided to use the car to go get groceries. You, the person doing whatever you felt was important and necessary by car, we're now suddenly experiencing more traffic-free streets. And even though the distance for drivers increased to get places within the city, the time it took them to get places went down. So I think Ghent is one of the best examples of low cost, high impact, and it's not all or nothing. You can still drive. It's just that they introduce a little friction into the decision making about whether or not you're going to drive. It's a great example.
Did they already have a super robust bus system, or did they add more funding to that bus system so that it would? Because I love this example of like, and I think about it all the time when I was in New York, like oftentimes you would put a location into Google Maps and it would tell you, okay, if you take the subway, it's this long. If you walk, it's this long. If it's the same amount of time, then I'm going to freaking walk, right? But
Yeah.
so like, if you see, okay, if I take the bus, it's this much. If I drive, it's this much. I'm going to take the bus. But that only works if the bus system is super robust, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's Europe, so obviously, like, there are
Yeah,
some differences. They had some good public transit, good streetcars. They were able to increase service on some of the existing lines. They added some bike infrastructure, but the thing that also happened is they didn't need to actually add all that much bike infrastructure. I sort of often say that every city has bike lanes. It's just all the cars are parked on them. Like if you
Yep.
just remove the cars and turn those streets into bicycle priority streets, lower the speed limit, put in some traffic calming, that's what they did. So
Yeah.
it really helped. And this was done in Groningen in the Netherlands. It's been done in some other places. Obviously congestion pricing here in New York, just introducing the $9 fee to come into 59th Street and below in Manhattan has decreased the amount of cars, and it has, in effect, improved bus service by increasing the speeds of buses, so much so that they sometimes run ahead of schedule. So it's been really remarkable.
Yeah.
But I can hear people thinking, I think I can hear people thinking, well, that's Europe.
I
right?
know, always.
And
Always, yeah.
And for sure, a lot of European cities, including Ghent, were first planned long before the automobile and
have
you
like
know,
that natural, like, because they were often have like they were reinforced cities, like they
yes,
had
so
this,
they had
like,
the natural wall.
Like
Yeah.
medieval
yeah,
cities.
yeah.
So I'd just like to talk about a North American city that has made some choices, and it's a new city, and it's not far from you. It's Vancouver, British Columbia.
Yeah.
And Vancouver, British Columbia is a very modern city, is obviously a relatively new city. White settlers got there and started building it on the same timeline as a lot of our North American cities. Doesn't have a medieval center.
No.
But what it does have and has had are a series of city planners and leaders who have actively chosen, and sometimes because of community activism, which was very strong, and a lot of it was women saying, don't destroy our neighborhoods to create highways.
Yep.
But they've made a series of very intentional decisions about how to build, where to build, and what to build that have made Vancouver's downtown an incredibly vibrant and easy place to get around by foot, by bike, by transit. And, I think everybody who says, well, it's only old European cities that can be like this, that's not true. We got a tour of downtown Vancouver from Brent Todderon, who's used to be the chief planner there. He was there during the Olympics that they had there. And there was a lot of construction that happened. And what they decided to do was build a lot of really beautiful housing, multi-unit, some of it quite high-rise, and then to be very thoughtful about what goes in on the ground floor.
Yeah.
And what there is there's big supermarkets, there's pharmacies, there's dry cleaners, there's a Costco in the middle of downtown Vancouver that people go to with little wheeled bags to bring their stuff home. And so I think it's really important to not get caught in this thing of thinking, well, because these cities were designed after the advent of the automobile, they're just a lost cause. They're not. There's lots that you can do. And, we were just in Phoenix. Phoenix is a city that has a great street grid and a lot of empty space. It has a lot of parking lots, that could be buildings that have services in them that people would go to. All of these things are things that, if you're thoughtful about them, you can make better communities wherever you are. And land use is a big part of that.
Yeah. First of all, I think Austin all the time, like there are so many opportunities to make that into an incredibly, a far, far more alternate transit heavy city. And I lived there for 4 years when I was a grad student, and I rarely used my car because it's actually fairly easy to be a student in Austin. There are a lot of ways for people in various parts of the city to get to the college, to the university. It is not easy if you are not trying to get to the college. The other thing that this makes me think of is Waco. Do you know the history of Waco at all?
No.
No, not really.
It's so interesting because there was a massive tornado that went through, I think I'm getting this right, sometime in the 1950s. And they, before that, had like a very typical mid-sized city downtown, and that tornado razed almost all of their big buildings. And the cheapest thing to do, and this was also at the same time that the freeway, that 35, they were building 35 that would take people from Austin through Waco up to Dallas. So they're putting in the freeway. They're like everywhere else. They're demolishing these historically black neighborhoods, historically that's where the freeway went. And they're also realizing, okay, people are moving to these suburbs. No one wants to be downtown. The easiest thing to do with all of these raised building lots is to turn them into parking. So they have so much parking in downtown Waco, which has served them well for like the resurgence of Waco as a destination spot for Chip and Joanna Gaines and Magnolia. But now they have like more parking than businesses, and that was the case for much of like the 70s, 80s, 90s, it was overladen with parking and no development. So when you become like, when you only do the thing that makes the cheapest sense to like turn something into a parking lot or turn it into, I think about the sides of freeways, always turn them into storage units, right? Like
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, like the best places to visit and the places where people sort of sometimes fantasize about living are the worst places to drive,
Yeah.
And, you can build a city where it's really easy to drive, like you're talking about, with surface parking lots and wide freeways. But what is there to drive to or even see? And so, no one fantasizes about going on vacation. No offense to Waco, Texas. Like if you have a choice between Paris, France, and Waco, Texas,
if you
you're
love
going to Paris.
Magnolia, you go to Waco, Texas.
Right.
Yes, I hear you. You have to drive to get there.
Yes.
Right. And I think we talk about this a lot, that there is a revealed preference in where people like to go on vacation. They like to go to a car-free beach resort. They like to go to a European city and stroll around Paris or Amsterdam.
Yep.
They like to go to Disneyland and walk around with their kids. Very few, except for like the camping trip, right? Trips that we make as vacationers tend to center around driving.
Well, and this always reminds me of like, why do people love Disneyland? Because it's like a classic car-free city. Like it's like the example is right there as like at the heart of the American vacation imagination. Like what if we had a version of Disneyland like everywhere, just the like commerce part,
Yes, exactly. But with the messiness of a real city, right?
Yeah.
Like that's what you want.
Yeah. Not the Disneyfied version of it. Okay, next question, close to my heart as someone who lives in a very rural area. This comes from Kate.
What comes after cars in very rural areas? My parents live 30 minutes from the Walmart, and we've lived in places 1 to 2 hours from the Walmart. I definitely want a society without cars. The unique geography of the United States just adds in some extra challenges. I'd love to hear how you and your guest imagine overcoming those challenges.
I think in those places, cars are always going to be a part of the landscape, and that's okay, right? Like in some places in this country, you're going to need air conditioning all the time, right? It would be a waste for me to have my air conditioning on right now in New York City. But it's okay that some people want to live in a place where they either have to have their heat on a lot or their air conditioning a lot. Yeah. And that's sort of how I see cars, of like, if you live in a rural area and the nearest Walmart is, 30 miles away or 30 minutes away or whatever, drive. It's the right tool for you to use for that job. Yeah. Absolutely. But if you live in those places, you should want then, I think we're all old enough to remember all the discussions of like peak oil that we were going
Yeah.
to run out, right?
Right.
If you are worried about limited resources, you should want the people with the ability to live with fewer resources to be able to do that really easily so that you can use the resources you need to live your life. And I think that's fine. Like if you and your family live in like up the side of a mountain in Vermont or, on some ranch in Montana, the San Juan Islands, like far from somewhere, like, and this is the best way to get around. Great. That's fine. And that's part of our approach is that we're not trying to lecture anybody. We're saying, let's start by fixing the places that should and can be fixed first, and then start thinking about other ways. Maybe it's electric cars in all of those places. Maybe it's a bus that just runs on weekends so people can get to the big destinations. Like there's lots of creative solutions, even in rural areas. But if you need a car there, great, good, fine.
Yeah.
But I want to jump in on the rural areas because I did spend many years of my life living in rural Maine. I lived on the side of a mountain on a dirt road that, didn't even get plowed all the way through in the winter times. Yep. And there were things about I lived in 2 different small villages in Maine, and each of them had a town center that had a store, and people would go and sit and have coffee there, and it had a gas station and a little market and all of those things. I really think that, and when I was living there, it was just during the 90s, the Walmart was being built out on the state highway.
Yep.
And that changed a lot of things for a lot of places. I think that a lot of people in Maine in particular realized what they were losing at the time and were trying really hard to fight some of that. Yep. And they were unsuccessful in many cases. But I do think that, in a lot of rural areas, though, as you were talking about, Anne, those places used to have these amenities. And I think that's something we can rebuild and that we can encourage again with zoning, which is, sort of a deadly boring word, but it's a really important tool for how we repair our society. And so, yes, certainly there are places where you're 100% going to make every trip by car. I've lived in those places. But even then, if I could drive 2 miles down the road to the cozy store where I could buy a sandwich and basic groceries and sit and have a coffee instead of driving 10 miles to the Walmart where I had to walk through a bleak parking lot to get to a big box store and then just drive home without having had much interaction with people. I think those are choices that we can make and that we can talk to our leaders about. How can we make this town a better place to be? And so, we're real about it. Like Doug says, we just think that cars should be put in their place to a certain extent.
Yeah.
I'd also say that we're talking about livability and proximity, but we should also, in the case of rural communities, especially talk about safety, because you can live a completely car-dependent life. And you should be able to live a completely car-dependent life and not be at fear of dying just because you're driving to the Walmart because of high speed limits or dangerous road conditions or dangerous drivers with whom you share the road. So I think, there are things that smaller communities, more rural communities can do to make roads safer so that people are not dying at these extreme rates that we see in the United States in all kinds of communities.
Can I insert, this is sort of a non sequitur, but not, the part of I-5 that I travel whenever I go into town, so just around Bellingham, the 20 miles, it's one of the deadliest parts of I-5. And they did these studies recently to figure out why, essentially, why are there so many accidents, so many fatalities? Do you want to know why? It's so fascinating.
Yes.
This area of town, the way that Bellingham was actually 4 different towns that then came together. This is a very common story for lots of places in the West, right? It's 4 villages that come together. It's also coastal. So it's very weird, sort of similar to Seattle in terms of the grid is fucked. I get lost all of the time. And then I-5 comes through and they snake it through town in a way that's supposed to be very convenient, right? And the way that they did it created the scenario where most people, in order to go even like 2 miles, you get on the freeway and then you get off, right? So you have tons of people entering the freeway for a very short trip and then getting off. So many more entrances and exits, so many more speed ups and slowdowns, so many more people trying to merge than any other place like on I-5.
Wow.
And so they basically, like, the freeway became too convenient.
Yes.
And that is why there are so many accidents.
Wow.
And I just think about that all the time. Like, what would the alternative be? And Bellingham is also a city that is trying so hard to become more bike friendly. And it's really, really difficult, in part because the grid is so weird. There aren't a lot of like byways. There are some, but there aren't a ton. And then if you're in town, you're often trying to get to the freeway. And it reminds me of the conversation about Ghent. Like, everyone is mad about the traffic and like all these people from Vancouver coming down to go to Seattle, and like they're coming to shop and go to Costco, like pack up the Trader Joe's parking lot. Like, just the experience of driving in the city is so much more elevated and angry than it should be.
Well, this is exactly my point that I was making earlier. It's like even drivers hate driving and they hate other drivers.
Yes.
Like, we can all agree that other drivers are the problem, right?
And I think, and then this gets deflected onto cyclists who are just trying to survive.
Yeah,
when really
exactly.
it's actually about the cars and the way that the traffic is working.
Yeah, and that's the big thing, is like the only solution to traffic is to give people viable alternatives to driving.
Yeah.
That's it. That's the only solution. You can't widen highways. There isn't space in some cities to do it. It wouldn't work even if you had the space. The only thing you can do, I sometimes joke, like, if you want better traffic, you should encourage all of your neighbors to take public transportation.
Yeah.
Like, that's what you should do.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I also sometimes, do you get frustrated with like the easy fixes that are right there that like just cannot happen? Like, they refuse to time the bus that comes to our ferry terminal to when the ferry is loading and unloading. It's
So-
like a
so
17-minute wait.
I'm really curious. What is that? I mean, I presume somebody has talked to them about this. Like, what is the rationale for that?
There's not enough ridership, but there's not enough ridership because
Right.
no one
Yeah,
wants
that's
to
always
wait
the
in
case.
rain.
I mean, it's,
Right.
there's an adage in our circles that like trying to gauge the necessity of a bike lane on a dangerous road by the number of cyclists on it is like trying to gauge the necessity of a bridge over a river by the number of drivers crossing it. Like, you just have to provide the service and then people will use it. Right.
Yeah. Today's episode is brought to you by Ollie. So, Melody, we had to disrupt our recording just a little bit ago because Polly wanted something. Do you think she wanted some Ollie?
Yeah, absolutely. With the even though the time change is not the kind of time change that should confuse her hunger clock, she's been crazy for the past couple days.
I know. My dogs are like, "What? You're feeding us now?" They're like thrilled about it. Dogs always want Ollie, and I always want my dog to be happy. And while I can't give them Ollie every minute of the day or during every podcast recording, although honestly, I think Bev, who's actually sitting on the bed right now, she'd be very happy to have that, I can give it to them at meal times and make it their favorite time of day. Ollie is obsessed with delivering the best food and experience for you and your dog, and they give you a way to check in on their health. Ollie's recipes are developed by dog chefs. To be clear, these aren't dogs in chef hats. They're human chefs who make good dog food. And these recipes are backed by vet nutritionists and made with the highest quality ingredients. And I love the way they package everything. They're not in cans, which just really grosses me out when it comes to dog food. So you take these packages, they arrive frozen. They're very neatly put together, easy to stack. You defrost the package and then keep it in this cute little pup tainer and dish it with this perfect accompanying spatula thingy. Ollie also has an app where you can upload a picture of your pet and ask real vets to check in on your dog's weight, digestion, teeth, and coat. It is amazing. Get ready for both you and your pup to be as obsessed as Polly. Head to ollie.com/culture, tell them all about your dog, and use code CULTURE to get 60% off your welcome kit when you subscribe today. Plus, they offer an obsession guarantee. If you're not completely obsessed, you'll get your money back. That's OLLIE.com/culture and enter code CULTURE to get 60% off your first box. Ollie, feed the obsession. Today's episode is brought to you by Wild Alaskan Company. So usually I take the sockeye salmon from Wild Alaskan Company and just grill it, and it's so good. But last week we were having this big thing of salmon chowder at a friend's house, and we needed to double the recipe because more people were coming over. And we had some salmon, but we need more. So what did I do? I took out 2 packages of the sockeye, let them defrost, chunked them up, and added them, and it was so good. I mean, the recipe was very good, but the salmon can make or break a recipe like that, and it was very good. Living on an island means that you can't always get a little extra salmon to add to your chowder at the last minute. Maybe you live somewhere where getting high quality fish is not something that you can do just like at the drop of a hat. Wild Alaskan Company allows me and allows you to invite everyone to the party and have enough chowder to feed them. Wild Alaskan Company is the best way to get wild-caught, perfectly portioned, nutrient-dense seafood delivered directly to your door. It's 100% wild-caught, never farmed. That means that there's no antibiotics, GMOs, or additives, just clean, real fish that support healthy oceans and fishing communities. It's nutrient-rich and full of flavor. Wild Alaskan fish is frozen off the boat to lock in taste, texture, and nutrients like omega-3s. And it's sustainably sourced, wild caught from Alaska, and every order supports sustainable harvesting practices. Right now, you can try it risk-free with a 100% money-back guarantee. If you are not completely satisfied with your first box, Wild Alaskan Company will give you a full refund. No questions asked, no risk, just high-quality seafood. Not all fish are the same, so you should get seafood you can trust. Go to wildalaskan.com/culture for $35 off your first box of premium wild-caught seafood. That's wildalaskan.com/culture for $35 off your first order. Thanks to Wild Alaskan Company for sponsoring this episode. Okay, next question is about families in car culture. This is from Maggie.
We're a suburban one-car family with 2 school-age kids that we often ferry by cargo bike, so I have a lot of thoughts. But my main question is, what's the deal with toxic masculinity and car brain? I notice that people, men, are so defensive if you criticize their driving. Failure to look for bikes, not signaling, dooring, etc. It makes me so mad because our safety is actually at stake, especially when the offender is a large truck that's obviously for show. Also, there was a bike lane that was put in that resulted in some reduced parking, and people absolutely lost their shit. How do we move past this kind of zero-sum rhetoric? Is it uniquely American?
Love this question.
I love this. Well, as the man here, allow me to explain to you all. No,
Man, what is it with you guys?
yeah, it's funny because I was going to say, Sarah, this is more your beat in terms of like petro-masculinity and all the rest.
Yeah.
But no, people do get very territorial, and usually the people who get the most territorial are of the male species.
Yep.
So for a certain extent, it is zero sum, right? Like, the problem of cars in cities is a geometry problem. And by necessity, if you're going to make a protected bike lane where there was none, unless you have some amount of extra space on the road, like 14-foot wide lanes that you can shave a couple feet off of here and there, you are by necessity going to have to take space away from one mode and give it to another. That's just geometry. So people get very defensive. It is very hard to explain this will be better for you, the driver, if I, the mother or father with the 2 kids, are on our cargo bike instead of our Jeep Wagoneer. It is very hard to explain that stuff. We all put a lot of pride in our cars when we have them. People spend a lot of money. It's very precarious when you're driving them. God forbid you so much as scratch it. Could be $1,000 out of your pocket.
This is so funny to me because
right?
I could give 2 shits about my car. I'm like, my Mazda CX-5 from 2017, it gets me where I need to go. And it is like, I'm proud that it looks like shit. That means I drive it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it would be great if more people saw their cars as just that, as just like a means of conveyance, but people don't. They see them as extensions of themselves and of their personalities.
Yes.
But yeah, there's a lot of fear involved with change. I think there's a real, something I compare our movement to is, remember the freak out over Obamacare in 2009, or early on when they were trying to introduce government health care.
Right.
It was like, gosh.
Oh, you mean Medicare?
Right, exactly. And then, flash forward to many years later in the first Trump go round, and it was like, hands off my Obamacare.
Right.
Like that to me is how a lot of this will play out. It's like the early reaction is no way, no how, no one's going to use it. I need my car. We'll flash forward here in New York 10, 15 years after we started putting in some bike lanes. People are defending the bike lanes that the last administration wanted to rip out.
Yep.
So, I think on the masculinity piece, we could probably do the entire episode just about that. Men, there is something about the consumption and the presentation, almost like the SUV has become the peacock's tail of mobility. It's lost all evolutionary function, all utility, and it's just for show. It's just for show.
Well, it's also all that's available oftentimes. Like not all, but like because of the how few sedans are now being produced.
Absolutely.
Yes, there's that too.
Yeah. But I think, I think a lot about this, and we do write about it in the book, and we've talked about it on the podcast quite a bit, that the toxic masculinity sort of Venn diagram with toxic driving. And, it's very real. And I do think that men in our society right now are fixated on demonstrating strength and power because they feel threatened in a lot of ways by the way that women have moved into the workforce and the educational system and proven themselves to be pretty good at working and going to school and stuff like that. And I think that the petromasculinity is kind of a reflection of that. It's I'm bigger, I'm stronger. And then when you see a woman riding her kids in a cargo bike and she passes you because it's actually a more efficient form of transportation, and you're stuck in your enormous truck idling as she goes tootling on by, I think that unfortunately there are a lot of men who are threatened by that.
Yeah.
And just the same way that men are threatened about all other things, like that women can play hockey, for instance. So I think it's part and parcel of all that. The sad thing is that in the case of men feeling threatened about their vehicles, it perpetuates this system that actually is, as we've mentioned a couple of times here, that kills people.
Yeah.
And that kills their own families and, and that destroys our natural world. And, we kind of have to find a way of checking that and figuring out how to talk to men about that. But at the same time, I don't think that we should be coddling them too much. I think we just have to try to build healthier places for families and hope that men at some point recognize that building places where women and children are comfortable is sort of part of their masculine duty. If they see that they have a masculine duty, isn't part of that creating safe spaces for growing families.
Yeah.
I think we need to figure out a way to talk about that.
Yeah. And I think we also have to define strength and power in the way that we mean it, because it's not physical strength. It is dominance, right?
Yes.
Like that to me is like the Trump version, the authoritarian version of it. It is not, we are smarter, stronger, and better. It is, as Sarah's saying, like an acknowledgement that we are none of those things. And so I'm using the royal we because I don't feel this way. But like so the car then becomes this way,
It's a phallus.
technically,
It is a
yes,
phallus.
absolutely,
Like, absolutely.
absolutely.
Prosthetic phallus.
Yes,
Absolutely.
it's more than that too, because it's like a giant exoskeleton in so many different ways, right?
Yes, yes.
And so technically, that woman carrying the two children on her bike is probably physically more capable of the dude sitting in his Ford F-350 or whatever, but he just feels humiliated and emasculated by this woman one-upping him. And
But
so,
would never understand it that way explicitly. It's like a feeling. And this is why, she gestures to the fact that like we ferry our kids by cargo bike, because a man could also be doing this. And I see this all the time.
Yes.
But that also, like, you have to call that guy a cuck for
Exactly.
like driving his kids to school with his cargo bike.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yes, and it is perceived, and men on bicycles, and we did a whole episode about the way that men on bicycles are portrayed in pop culture.
Yeah.
They are considered to be less masculine, which is
So feminine in the United States, so feminized. No,
and the speed with which people will use homophobic slurs towards male presenting cyclists, it's pretty remarkable that there is that connection.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, this is a great connection. We're going to end on a question that brings it all together. And this one comes from Sarah, who's a huge fan.
I read your book and will see you on your Columbus stop on your book tour. I love the points you brought up about motor normativity and how people don't see the water that is cars and their place in our world. Do you have any advice for how to help others see the water?
Well, first, maybe we should define motonormativity, because I feel like a lot of your listeners would not know that concept. So we talked to a researcher, Dr. Ian Walker. He did a study with his colleagues that has been replicated in various scenarios where they substituted different words when they asked people questions about things. For example, it is not okay to smoke in places where other people have to breathe in cigarette fumes. He then replaced that with it is not okay to drive in places where other people have to breathe in car exhaust. And in the first case about cigarettes, the overwhelming majority said, no, it's not okay to do that. In the second case with cars, it completely flipped. The overwhelming majority was like, yeah, that's okay. Now, obviously there are some differences. Cars are necessary for transportation, a cigarette is not. But so the idea being that we excuse behavior when a car is introduced into the conversation that we never would in any other scenario. Like, it's okay for a driver to cut a few corners to save time and money. People generally think that's okay. It's okay for a forklift operator in a factory to cut a few corners to save time and money. Nobody thinks that's okay.
Yeah.
And so that's the motonormativity piece. And getting people to see that, as the person's asking, is very challenging. And we do end the book with this idea of like, how do you get people to even see the problem? So I'll kind of hand it off to Sarah because she can bring it home.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that you do need to take opportunities as they arise to talk to people. And, for instance, these snowstorms that we've been enduring on the East Coast, you can show people the soot on the snow once the cars start driving again and say, that is what you and your kids are breathing. And wouldn't it be great if we had fewer of those around? Similarly, we didn't have as many cars driving on the street for a few days. Wow, it's so nice and peaceful and quiet. Yeah. That's because the cars aren't driving. So I feel like there is a certain way in which you have to take your friends and loved ones, and every now and then when you see an opening, when they're complaining about, God, gas is expensive. I went to the pump today and I had, it really is. Wouldn't it be great to have choices about how to move around? And, or like if somebody has a parent who's older and is aging out of driving, and all the agony that causes, say to them, wouldn't it be great if your parent we're able to participate fully in the life of this community without a vehicle. How could we make that possible? How could we change our community so that when we get to be that age,
Yep.
we have those options? And so I think it's really a question of opportunity and compassion and realizing that most people are just scared of change, and they get anxious when they think that their options and privileges are being taken away.
Yeah.
And to try to reframe it as possibility and imagination of a better world. And I do think we're reconsidering a lot of our systems right now, because a lot of our systems are breaking down.
Yeah.
And I think that it's a unique opportunity, perhaps, for people to open their minds and imagine a better life and demand it.
I think that's a wonderful place for us to stop. If people want to find more of you and your work, where can they find it?
Well, you can listen to the War on Cars podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Our book is called Life After Cars. Pick it up at your local independent bookstore, preferably, or the library. And it's all at lifeaftercars.com.
Amazing. Thank you both so much. This was a real delight.
It was great. Thank you for such a wonderful conversation.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening to the Culture Study Podcast. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, because we have so many great episodes in the works, and I promise you don't want to miss any of them. If you want to suggest a topic, ask a question about the culture that surrounds you, or submit a question for our subscriber-only advice time segment, go to our Google form at tinyurl.com/culturestudypod, or check the show notes for a link. And if you want to support the show and get bonus content, head to patreon.com/culturestudy. It's $5 a month or $50 a year, and you'll get ad-free episodes, an exclusive advice time segment, and weekly discussion threads for each episode. The Culture Study Podcast is produced by me, Anne Helen Peterson, and Melody Rowell. Our music is by Poddington Bear. You can find me on Instagram at Anne Helen Peterson, Melody at Melodious47, and the show at Culture Study Pod.